ministers, excellencies, distinguished audience, and ladies and gentlemen. When we at the Cercle des économistes decided to organize the second edition of the forum between Singapore and France, our hope was that views would be sufficiently different across speakers so that we could enrich our mutual understanding and enrich our visions. I should say from the start that our views, and I'm speaking here for my colleagues and myself, our views have not been disappointed. We haven't been disappointed, and our views have been exceeded. So I would like first to thank all of the speakers, including the participants who asked questions, for an excellent session, 2-day sessions on various topics. I will be short, but still I'm allowed to share a few of the takeaways I'm bringing back from this meeting before we have to let the floor for the ministers. First, I think we very much saw that there are different perceptions of globalization. And here I would take Danny Quah's words. For some countries, including Singapore, the lifting of the tide, the lifting effect, is the dominant perception in the society. For others, it is now the fracture produced within our society that's the dominant factor. Although we know that it's not only due to globalization, it's also due to to technical progress. But in a number of countries, this is what dominates our public perception. Both ministers who spoke at the beginning agreed on the importance of providing hope and perspectives to all. Ministers Chan and Sapin both insisted on the role of a number of domestic policies, in particular education and lifelong training, together with the role of multilateral policies. There was no full consensus here in this room on the relative weights of domestic policies and multilateral policies and the need for change of multilateral policies. But I think the speakers in general spotted a number of areas where multilateral policies will need to adapt, including social, environmental, and tax issues. All speakers in the room agreed on the importance of multilateralism. The Bretton Woods institution may not be enough, but they are certainly not dead. And I think both European and ASEAN speakers are still, both expressed very much their trust and the importance of multilateralism, although they also noted the difficult world in which multilateralism is advancing. I will take here the words of Pascal Lamy, who said multilateralism is very much in the genes of Europe. We are at a critical juncture where the world is changing very rapidly. We had very good discussions on innovation with a number of speakers sharing their firm's experience, which was particularly interesting and enlightening for all of us, I think. We realize that we are in a change of paradigm in terms of the role of innovation and how disruptive it can be for our economies. And here, I think there was broad agreement on the fact that you both need to get great success, take full advantage of innovation, and at the same time, make sure that innovation is inclusive. Adopting the appropriate rules, and here there were a number of areas which were mentioned on all sides as important aspects. In particular, I'm thinking about privacy rules. But there were also other rules mentioned: copyright, welfare, and tax systems. Who will lead the world tomorrow? Well, I think there was agreement that we don't know. So I will be brief on this one. Although we all agree that leadership should be about solving public goods problems. Among public goods problems that were discussed, climate change is certainly an issue for all of us, and certainly an issue calling for coordination. Financial stability is also very much a shared issue. And here we noted that progress has been made in a number of areas, but risks remain. In particular, this is of particular sensitivity for emerging economies, the combination of high capital mobility and foreign exchange volatility. So I only noted a few points, and you will forgive me for all the points I forgot, but this is already a lot of ideas and a lot of takeaways. So I can only thank again all of you, thank in particular the two co-organizers of the Cercle des économistes, so both the Economic Society of Singapore, with Euston Quah and his colleagues, in particular Manu Bhaskaran, who's been very instrumental, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and here I would like to thank very much Danny Quah. But I'm not forgetting here to thank all the organizers. Some of them have remained hidden. Others have been taking this stage very effectively to remind us of the way we had to proceed. And we all know how important they were in the smooth running of these 2 days. I'm also thanking, of course, the other academic partners we had, the Singapore University of Social Sciences and ESSEC from Singapore. Thanking as well the French Embassy, and we were particularly happy to be the last event of the Year of Innovation between Singapore and France. And finally, I'm also very much thanking our supporters, our sponsors, without whom this event wouldn't have been possible. So that's Amundi, Ardian, Bloomberg, Viascot, CMA, CGM, GIC, LVMH, and Société Générale. We were very happy to have these 2 days together, and we very much think that this will be a lot of material from which to build for future thinking. The first next step I'm seeing is, and we mentioned this event a number of times during these last 2 days, so it shouldn't come as a surprise, is the meeting we're going to have in Aix-en-Provence at the beginning of July. The meeting we're having this year, on July 5, 6, and 7, is a meeting centered on trust. And I think that a silver lining of all the discussions we've had in the last 2 days was very much trust. How can we have trust in the perspectives of the global economies? How can we have trust in globalization? So I would very much like to invite all of us to come to Aix. And when I say all of us, it's an event that's open to all, that's free, and you just need to register. So indeed, if all of you want to come to Aix, you're all very welcome. I would very much like to invite you all to come to Aix, and at least I'm sure we will keep in contact and continue to exchange ideas in Aix and elsewhere. With this, thank you very much again, and I will leave the floor to the other two organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Waysand. We would now like to invite the President of the Economic Society of Singapore, Professor Euston Quah, to deliver his closing remarks. Professor Quah, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I trust this has been a very productive 2 days conference. It has covered so many relevant, contemporary, and future issues for the world economy, ranging from globalization to trade to regional integration to new financial instruments and innovations. I'm also very pleased that in many of these sessions, I note there were some pertinent discussions on the environment and climate change issues, and including the last session. As an environmental economist myself, I do think that much of what we need to build a better future rests on the prerequisite that we have a good, conducive, and beautiful natural world to live in. I recall in yesterday's session on globalization, there was a discussion on trade and environment, and Mr. Bertrand Bardet had made an interesting remark along these lines that no matter how good our trade system is, there will be no trade if we don't have a world to live in. But what is key is how to engage people to be environmentally conscious, to be like the Europeans and much of the Japanese. We still have a very long way to go for much of Asia, including the richer countries in Asia, on this particular aspect of being environmentally conscious. Another frequently encountered topic, first mentioned in the speech by Claire Waysand at the opening session, is the continuing issue of gender equality and inclusivity. This issue was also mentioned a few times in informal conversations during the conference. I'm happy to say that in the latest 2018 World Economic Forum survey of wage equity between women and men for similar work done, Singapore scored the second highest in the world, with a score of 0.819, while Iceland ranked first in the world with a score of 0.820. This represents a relative improvement in terms of score and rank compared to the 2016 study when Singapore ranked fourth with a score of 0.810. There are also positive trends in Singapore, including a narrowing part-time workers' gender wage gap and increased representation on the boards of public companies. But France leads the way globally with a 42.1% female board participation and representation, while Singapore has increased to only 15.2%. So there's a long way to go. I'm well aware that gender inequality goes beyond the income wage salary gap, but this factor is definitely an important progression. There should, of course, be other empirical evidence to complement this factor, such as social relationships. My third and final point is that ultimately, the goal of individuals and society is to have a higher quality of life and to maximize happiness. Significant improvements in income levels can only bring so much happiness. Beyond that, one has to look at the other sources of well-being. The non-material wealth aspects are equally, if not even more important. Globalization and financial innovations bring both disruptions as well as improvements in life for individuals and society. One major discussion point that keeps resurfacing is that the fruits of globalization should also benefit all segments of society. The question is how to ensure this. Good governance and impactful welfare policies are crucially needed. We know that. But I would say that just as with the case of the environment, there must be a nurturing and naturing of environmental consciousness for our one Earth, as well as the critical need for civic and social consciousness. The latter requires people-centered policies and a high degree of care and concern for fellow human beings. While financial innovation, fintech, and the new digital economy may be disrupting an old world order, it must also forge a better world with skills and educational relevance updated, fear of technology reduced, and inefficiencies eradicated. However, I cannot overemphasize the importance of managing this transition. And this is where the academia, the industry, and the government must work together in synergy so that the new horizons for the world economy can be a better one. I hope that this forum has served as a platform for such conversations between different parties that will be translated into action. It remains for me to thank our co-sponsors, Les Cercle du Économistes, especially President Lorenzi and Claire Waysand. I also thank Dean and Professor Danny Quah of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy for providing not just the venue, but also his very able staff, and as well as the countless hours of meetings on suggestions on this conference. I'm also grateful to my own colleagues in the Economic Society of Singapore, in particular, Vice Presidents Manu Baskaran and David Lee, and our Honorary Secretary Walter Teixeira, and Honorary Assistant Secretary Mr. Zach Lee, for all the hard work that they had done. And I also not forget Ambassador Tan Yok Cho, the former ambassador of Singapore to France, who was the first motivator and who brought this conference to our attention, this series. for which we're now having the second one. So thank you, Ambassador Tan. I look forward to increasing interactions between us and our French counterparts. I thank all the speakers for their insightful remarks and vision, and I thank you, the audience, for remaining fixated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Quah. As we draw to a close, it is my pleasure to invite the Dean of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and Lee Ka-shing Professor in Economics, Professor Danny Quah, to deliver his closing remarks. Dean, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of an amazing 2 days of discussion and debate on new horizons for the world economy. The talk has captivated and excited. It has ranged from globalization to financial innovation, to climate change, and indeed, why stop there, to the future of the world. I thank our co-organizers, the Cercle Economies in France, and here in Singapore, the Economic Society of Singapore, for the fruitful collaboration that's resulted in these 2 days of intellectual exchange. I thank all our speakers and our moderators for the content they have provided us, and our sponsors and partners for the critical sinew and muscle that make all of this happen. I thank my wonderful event staff for the amazing work that they have done here these 2 days. Most of all, I want to thank you, the audience, for coming along with us and sharing this intellectual journey. Thank you all very much and have a good, safe trip home. Thank you.